You can take any interpretation you like. For us, I still think it's a signal they are getting closer to beginning that normalization process once again. I think the surprise next year will be that actually inflationary pressures build. We do finally get that wage pressure that Yellen is yearning for, and therefore we actually see a faster pace of hikes than the markets are anticipating.
Is growth going to come through the system? Because one of the big concerns now is if you start lifting interest rates or you get a yield curve steepening in some countries, maybe even Japan, that you've suddenly got deflation or stagflation rather on the world economy rather than deflation, which is a challenge in itself.
Well, I think there have been a number of headwinds to US growth this year which are starting to fade. So the earlier dollar strength is now washing through. There's been a big drag from energy investment. Oil prices stabilising, we're seeing rig counts step back up again. And also there's been a large inventory cycle in the US which has really depressed manufacturing activity. So I think the economy can tolerate some gradual move higher in yields from these current very low levels.
I can't help but think there might be a little politics at the FOMC itself going on, where you had a number of dissenters. I mean, to go back to the point, this is highly unusual to see dissent. Typically there's consensus, as you see most members rally behind the governor. This didn't happen. So was it a signaling message to have dissenters come through and say they want to be raising rates now? Was there something more in it than just having people say, well, you know, it should be instant?
Well, I think clearly there are some divisions within the FOMC, but also, as you mentioned, it is used as a signalling mechanism. So the Fed were nervous about hiking last night because clearly markets were not braced for that prospect. But by having the dissenters, by changing the language, saying the case is strengthened, by changing the risk assessments to roughly balance, that's the strongest signal as they can possibly give. They're getting to the cusp of raising rates once again.
So just to wrap up, in your view, do you think we are now looking at 3 rate hikes? Do you think the Fed is now spot on, 1 this year, 2 next year? Do you think that's actually going to transpire? Because let's face it, the forecasts have been well and truly off from where the market participants have seen them.
Well, clearly the markets are sceptical once again because repeatedly the Fed have been lowering their dots. But I think finally we're getting closer to much more realistic projection. So I think there's a really good chance we get 2 hikes next year.
What do we do though? What do we do? I mean, great analysis, I get it. You know, she's looking for more robust data. What do we do? How do we play it?
Well, I think it's quite tricky for financial markets because we're in this Goldilocks period of reasonable growth.
Doesn't feel like Goldilocks.
But loads of liquidity.
Yeah.
And it's a bit of a tightrope. So if growth comes in slightly better and the Fed hikes, that sucks liquidity out of the markets. That could be bad for asset prices. If we get a growth disappointment, then people will be really wide. Oh my gosh, we haven't really had much tightening and yet the economy is falling over for structural reasons. So to remain on this glide path, I think gives you quite a narrow course the markets actually have a decent 2017.